Group 4, Language and Brain. How do we First is neurolinguistic. Neurolinguistics studies the neurological basis of language. Explores how the processing involved in language take place across nerves. Pays close attention to chemical and electrical processing in the brain. Psycholinguistic. Psycholinguistics studies the psychological underpinnings of language. Focuses of acquisition, storage, comprehension, and the production of language. Next is localization. Attempts to locate language in brain having a long story. This suggested that language must be an independent faculty and not part of our general power of thought and reasons. Instead, that two parts of the brain are flexible enough. Noam Chomsky deferred attention to the fact that every normal child successfully acquires a first language, no matter what its intelligence or learning style is. And next is lateralization. Human body is a symmetrical heart, liver, use of limbs and animals. Functions of the brain become lateralized. Each hemisphere specialized for particular ways of working. LAD. LAD stands for a language acquisition device. LED is inborn a child, and according to some scientists, it ends after the age of 7 years, but many say that ends after the age of 12 years. And this is part of brain areas involved in language. The broadcast area for the yellow color, primary motor cortex, the red one, supramarginal gyrus is the green, anigular gyrus is the another green. I'm sorry, this is a dark green, and it is the light green, and the orange awareness area, and the primary auditory area is the blue one. Geography of brain: upper versus lower, left versus right, front versus back. Language disorder. Aphasias are inability to perceive, process, or produce language due to physical damage to the brain. Broca's aphasia result in an ability to produce sequences of sound influence speech, tendency to eliminate any functional vocabulary. Wernicke's aphasia result in an ability to understand speech and in an ability to speak meaningfully. Acquired dyslexia and acquired dysgraphia due to annular gyrus damage. And next, we're going to about ideas language and acquisition. Language before Noam Chomsky. Before Noam Chomsky, language was considered as behavior, not knowledge, as incorporated in the structuralist linguists best known from Bloodfield book Language. Bloomfield, 1933. The adult is a crucial part of language acquisition process. The child would never learn to use any word without the adult's reaction and reinforcement. The Bloomfieldian version of language acquisition was the commonplace of linguists before Chomsky. Chomsky's views of language. Creativity is the key notion for Chomsky. People regularly understand and produce sentences that they have never heard before. And stimulus is not always as simple as a milk deprivation. What would be the response of a person looking at a painting? He might say Dutch or classes, which the wallpaper. I think you like abstract art. Never saw it before, tilted, hanging too low, dull, beautiful, awesome, stunning, or anything else come to mind. One stimulus apparently has many responses. There can be no certain prediction from stimulus to response. Next stage of language faculty. Chomsky has conceptualized language is term of initial and final stage of the mind. In the beginning, if is the mind of newborn baby who knows no language, term the initial or zero state SO. At the end, the adult native speaker with full knowledge of language, this final state is static on competence in essentially complete and unchanging once it has been attained. The adult native speaker's knowledge is therefore termed as a steady state or SS. Acquiring language means progressing from not having any language as O to having full competence SS, SO to SS. Language acquisition device LAD. Children heard a number of sentences said by their parents and other caretakers. The primary linguistic data. They process this in some fashion within their black box called the language acquisition device LAD, and they acquire a linguistic competence, generative grammar, input out to primary linguistic data, and generative grammar input to primary linguistic data. It shows that LED not only processes input data, but also adds something of its own in this raw data. And three levels of adequacy. The first is observational adequacy, descriptive adequacy, and explanatory adequacy. Fourth stage to the property of the stimulus argument. Cook 1991. A native speaker of a particular language knows a particular aspect of syntax. This aspect of syntax is not learned from outside. This aspect of syntax could not have been acquired from the language in out available to children. This aspect of syntax is built into the mind. And the last one is principle and parameter theory and language acquisition. Universal grammar is present in the child's mind as a system of principles and parameters. The principle of UG are principles of initial state as zero to the projection principle binding government, and the others are built in structure of the language faculty in human mind. Their principles are not learned to so much as applied.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Gishy Shifa Zahra. My student ID is 20018062. At this time, I want to explain about how do children acquire the components of language. It now appears that babies begin language acquisition before birth by learning the melody of their native language. After birth, they continue their language acquisition by cooing and babbling the sounds of human language. They go on to say one word, two words, and then longer sentences. They then spend many years learning the meaning of tens of thousands of words. Phonology. There's evidence that a baby in the womb in the third trimester is already acquiring prosodic features of their native language. The researchers doing the study, Berkemempe and colleagues, cannot rule out the possibility that the babies learned this part of the melody of their language in the 3 days after birth. Based on other studies that show that prosodic features of speech pass through the wall of the abdominal area with little disruption, it is more likely that the learning begins in the womb. Within a few months after birth, babies begin making verbal sounds, cooing, which come first is all vowel sounds such as a, u, e. By 4 to 6 months of age, babies are babbling, alternating consonant and vowel such as ba 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 ba, ga ga, mama mama. After 6 months of age, babies begin to learn the phonemic structure of their own language and slowly stop responding to the phonemic distinction of other language. Syntax. Babies' first words are not words, they are sentences. When a 12-month-old baby says cat, it is a sentence that might mean there is the cat, or I want to pet the cat, or keep that cat away from me. These one-word utterances are referred to as hollow phrases. Because they are complete or undivided phrase, this stage of language acquisition is the holophrastic stage. The two-word stage begins sometime after 18 months of age, when children begin combining words into two-word utterances, but these are not just any two words spoken together. They are two words they have a grammatical relationship to each other and express a complete thought in the same way that an adult sentence does. As children begin adding more words to their two-word sentence, their utterances are described as telegraphic speech. Telegraphic speech occurs as children begin adding more words to their two-word sentence. Morphology. As children's language becomes more sophisticated, they began to add bond morphemes to the basic words. One of the first bond morphemes they acquire is the plural marker. In fact, children may go through 3 steps in the acquisition of the plural marker. In the first step, they imitate what they hear around them. The second step, they overgeneralize the rule and apply it to all of the words. Overgeneralization occurs when children acquire a morphological rule and then apply it too broadly. At the third step, they learn the expression to the rules. Children say their first word around age 1. From then on, they learn about 10 words a day until around the age of 6, when their productive vocabulary will be about 14,000 words. Their receptive vocabulary can be twice this size, just as in the acquisition of phonology and morphology. The acquisition of semantics follows universal principles that guide the child in sorting out the meanings of words. Children begin the process of refining their understanding of words. First, they extend the meaning of words they know to things that have similar properties. This overextension is similar to the overgeneralization in syntax mentioned earlier. During preschool and beyond, the inflectional bond morpheme ing, present progressive, will usually have been the first grammatical morpheme to be acquired during the toddler years. In the preschool years, it will be followed by such morphemes as in on prepositions, as possessive, and the and articles, among others. The 2-year-old simply places a negative word no, don't, or not used interchangeably at the beginning of the utterance to negate it. Don't that one to not that one. No vacuum to don't use the vacuum cleaner. Not buckled to my car seat's not buckled. By about 3.5 years, the child, whose utterances are becoming longer and more complex, has learned to put the negative word between the subject and predicate, but still doesn't distinguish between them. That don't scooter to does not scooter. It's another cat. I not close it to I didn't close it. I don't want it to I don't want it. Around 3 years old, Why, how, and when are used to form questions. The order of appearance of the WH question words makes sense when you realize that what, who, and where refer to concrete reference. But when refers to time concepts that the small child has trouble grasping, why and how introduce complex questions that are difficult to answer even for adults. Also, around 3 years old, the form of yes or no questions began to take on the correct inverted word order with auxiliary verbs. Preschool children are also learning pragmatics, the rules of conversation and the use of language. They may also then become aware of strategies for changing the topic to one of more interest than the current one. Another feature of pragmatics, conversation repair, occurs when the speaker senses that the listener has not understood the message. The speaker makes correction or restatement to clarify the message. Teachers and parents often expand a message, giving examples or more information. They might also paraphrase the information using synonyms for the original wording. Indirect language is easily misunderstood by preschool children. The 3-year-old who answered the phone threats, "Is your mother home?" is a yes or no question, not as an indirect request. But the 5-year-old understand the indirect request. Preschool children take language literally.
Video, I will explain the material about nonverbal communications. Deaf children and hearing children in deaf families are acquire sign language in a way that is similar to acquisition of spoken language. All children, both hearing and deaf, make meaningful gestures called emblems long before they can speak or sign. Parents have long known that babies are capable of communicating with gestures many months before they can say the first word. It is not uncommon for 9-month-old to wave bye-bye, to hold out his or her arms asking to be picked up, and or to make an exaggerated chewing movement with the mouth to indicate the hunger. Bilingualism. Most of the people in the world acquire more than one language. Simultaneous bilingualism occurs when a child acquires two or more languages from birth. This occurs when more than one language is spoken in the household. For example, in the United States, a child may be raised by a foreign-speaking nanny who has joined an otherwise English-speaking household. Or in an immigrant family, the grandparents might speak the ancestral language to the child while the parents and older siblings speak English. And then, sequential bilingualism occurs when the child acquires a second language after having begun to acquire a first language. For example, in the United States, the older children in immigrant families may speak only the ancestral language until they begin school, while they are acquire English. Is theories concerning bilingual language acquisitions. There are two main hypotheses that propose how children acquire and process two or more languages. Each has its proponent and detractors. The first is called the unitary system hypothesis. The unitary system hypothesis believes that infants who are exposed to two or more languages begin by constructing one lexicon and one set of semantic rules to encompass both languages. Later, they divide the words into separate lexicons for each language, but continue using one set of rules. Around 3 years of age, they develop separate set of semantic rules. An example of language mixing used to support the unitary system in the 2-year-old French or English child who has an English-speaking babysitter for butter or bread. And then, who support the separate system hypothesis believe that infants differentiate the languages from the very beginning, constructing different phonological system, lexicon, and semantic system. These researchers will interpret the preceding example of language mixing by the child as a form of code switching, similar to Spanish speakers who use English words like okay and bye in their conversations. Second language learning after puberty. So, learning a language after the age of puberty as a result of immigration to new country as an academic requirement for a diploma or as an educational goal for self-improvement is a somewhat different process than first language acquisitions. Whether it takes place in a classroom or in contact with speakers of the second language, it is more of an intellectual process than first language acquisitions. It may involve pronunciation practice, grammar exercise, and vocabulary memorization, or it may be less formal and simply involve listening carefully to native speaker, asking about the meaning of word or analyzing and imitating utterance, and any case lexical and grammatical knowledge, and the new language is stored in a different part of the brain than the first language.